The wizard let the last echoes of his words fade before lifting his cup and taking a slow sip. The patrons of the Drunken Griffon waited, their eyes alight with curiosity. Then, setting his cup down, he leaned forward, letting his voice drop into the hush. That night, before they reached the bastion, Jane, Ran, and Whistle made camp in the shadow of an old willow. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows against the towering trunks of the forest. The sky was a deep navy, with stars peeking through the gaps in the canopy. Whistle stretched his legs toward the flames, sighing contentedly. I must say I'm a fan of this arrangement. A warm fire, good company, and the distinct possibility of not being stabbed in the next few hours. It's an improvement over our last encounter. Jane smirked, poking at the fire with a stick. You're welcome to find some bandits if you're getting bored. Ran chuckled, shaking her head. I think we've had enough trouble for one day. Besides, we'll need all our strength for tomorrow. The bastion won't be an easy place to walk into. Whistle grinned, leaning back against his pack. Yes, grand halls of magic, vast knowledge, secrets untold. But tell me, Jane, what exactly do you plan to do once we get there? I assume it's not just sightseeing. Jane hesitated, staring into the fire. The rune in her palm pulsed faintly. I need answers. This magic, it's powerful, but it's also dangerous. If I don't understand it, someone else will. And I have a feeling that someone might already be looking. Ran studied her. The bandits weren't your first encounter. Jane shook her head. Hooded figures were following me a day before I ran into you. I was able to hide and send them on a goose chase, but not before I heard them talking. They knew what the rune was, more than I did. If they're after it, then I need to stay ahead of them. Whistle let out a low whistle. Well, if we do run into them, I vote for a more strategic approach this time. Less of the getting nearly gutted strategy. Ran stirred, watching the dim embers glow faintly. She glanced at Jane, who sat quiet, deep in thought, the rune still clutched in her palm. Gold coin for your thoughts? Ran asked. Jane smirked. Too much on my mind. Whistle groaned, rolling onto his side. Would it help if I hummed you a lullaby? Jane chuckled but didn't answer. Instead, she traced the rune's edges with her thumb. Do you ever wonder why magic needs to be taught? Why there are places like the Bastion? Ran nodded. Because wild magic is dangerous. Without training, it can spiral out of control. Some people are born with it. Others gain it through relics or rituals. But if they don't learn control, they become a danger to themselves and everyone around them. Whistle stretched. Hence, the Arcane Bastion, a place to shape those with magic before they become a problem. Not all of us were lucky enough to get formal training, though. Some of us had to, improvise. Jane raised an eyebrow. And by improvise, you mean trial, error, and the occasional small explosion. I got there in the end. Whistle smirked. Magic isn't just a tool, it's a force. If you don't wield it right, it wields you. Ran poked at the fire absently. That's why the Bastion doesn't turn people away. If someone has magic, they must learn control, whether noble-born or street rat. Otherwise, the world would be in chaos. Jane nodded thoughtfully. Then I suppose I'm exactly where I need to be. Ran rolled her eyes. Get some sleep. We reach the Bastion tomorrow. As the embers died down, the three drifted into uneasy rest, the looming fortress of magic waiting beyond the trees. They arrived at the Bastion under the cover of night, the wizard continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Its towering spires loomed against the dark sky, the walls gleaming under the pale light of the moon. But something was wrong. Ran held up a hand, signaling for silence. From their vantage point beyond the tree line, they saw them, figures clad in dark robes, their hands raised toward the great doors of the Bastion. Tendrils of magic pulsed through the air as they worked some kind of spell, their voices a low, eerie chant. Jane's eyes went wide. They were wearing the same robes as the ones who followed her, black in design with white stars around the cuff of the sleeves. "Those are the same robes as the figures who followed me," she whispered. Whistle exhaled sharply. "I don't think they're here for a late-night study session." Jane's grip tightened around the rune. "They're trying to break in. We have to stop them." Ran nodded. "But how?" "There are at least a dozen of them." Whistle's eyes gleamed with mischief. "We make them think there's more of us than there are. Give them a reason to run." Jane arched a brow. "And how do you propose we do that?" "With a little theatrics." Whistle pulled a small pouch from his belt, shaking its contents. A fine, shimmering dust swirled within. "Ever heard of alchemist's powder? Toss it into a fire, and it flares up like a demon's breath." Jane caught on quickly. "We create a distraction, make them think the Bastion's defenses have awakened. I can use the rune to help." She wasn't sure how she knew how to use it, but another question to add to her long list for the Bastion. Ran nodded. "We don't have to fight them, just scare them off." Working swiftly, Jane hid behind a tree, gripping the rune. Whistle darted around, placing small bundles of the powder near the tree line. Ran positioned herself on a ridge above, ready to send echoes of steel against stone. With a final glance, Whistle gave the signal. Jane unleashed a pulse of energy through the rune. The rune created an echo that sounded like whispers turned into unearthly wails. At the same time, Whistle hurled a handful of powder into a smoldering log. Flames roared to life in unnatural green and blue, casting monstrous shadows against the trees. From above, Ran struck her blade against a loose slab of stone. The metallic clang rang through the air like the tolling of a great bell. The effect was immediate. The figures froze, their spell faltering. One by one they turned, eyes wide with fear. The ground seemed to tremble beneath them as Jane channeled another surge of magic, sending a phantom wind howling through the clearing. Panic took hold. The figures shouted, backing away toward the shadows. Then, as if pursued by the ghosts they feared, they fled, vanishing into the night. The three adventurers exhaled as the echoes faded. Whistle dusted off his hands. "I must say, we make a rather spectacular haunting." Ran smirked. "I'm just glad it worked." Jane stepped forward, staring at the now quiet gates of the Bastion. "We made it, but something tells me this is only the beginning." The wizard leaned back in his chair, his story lingering in the flickering candlelight of the Drunken Griffon. "And so, dear listeners, the doors of Tais." Jane stepped forward, staring at the now quiet gates of the Bastion. "We made it, but something tells me this is only the beginning." The wizard leaned back in his chair, his story lingering in the flickering candlelight of the Drunken Griffon. "And so, dear listeners, the doors of the Arcane Bastion stood before them, not yet knowing the fate that would walk through its halls. But that, my friends, is a tale for another night." And with that, he took another sip of his drink, leaving the audience breathless with anticipation.